Mariah McKay, and I would like to introduce you to Mariah McKay. Mariah is one of the busiest and most productive people alive. Plus, her focus is toward doing good. She's the founder and executive director of the Spokane Independent Metro Business Alliance, referred to as SIMBA, among many other endeavors. Mariah, let's start with SIMBA. What led you to founding this organization, and what is its mission?
Thank you, Nan. So I think what led me to do business organizing work as a vehicle for social and cultural and environmental and economic change really has to do with my analysis of how change comes about and what I saw as missing in our local region's landscape for doing this kind of work. So SIMBA is a business and consumer alliance working to create a more equitable and resilient regional economy. And we see ourselves as a part of something called the New Economy movement. There's many names for this nascent movement that's taking root across our nation and across the world. With a globalized economy, it's important to understand the international dimensions of the economic issues and the resourcing issues that underpin our work in creating a more sustainable economy. And so another name for this effort is the solidarity economy, the sharing economy. You may have heard many different names by which this work is taking place and becoming better resourced and better integrated unto itself at different levels of organization, from the local level to the state level to the national and international levels. And so at SIMBA, our role as a nonprofit is education. We also provide direct membership benefits to our business members. But for the education side, we are sharing the message that we need to create and build and live into a quadruple bottom line economy, rather than our current economy, which is that of a single bottom line, that of the almighty dollar or profit. So the quadruple bottom line, we like to say there's 4 P's, not just 1 P. So in addition to profit, we also want to look at a business's impacts on people, the planet, and policy and governance decisions for how a corporation runs itself. So is that workplace democratic in nature? Does it function more like an autocracy? Who holds decision-making power? And are people who are helping to create those profits sharing in them equitably? And there's so many more questions of equity and inclusion that our organization advocates around and acts towards, that there's much to discuss, and I will let you guide the conversation where you will. But I hope that answers your question.
Well, it sounds a little bit like something that is quite new called a B-Corp. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes, we are. And we actually have a B-Corp consulting firm that was one of the early business members of SIMBA. One of their principals served briefly as our board secretary when we were in our incorporation stage. And so we actually are partners with this consulting firm to help generate business for their services. So we are trying to create the customers that then will make their consulting firm more profitable and have wider reach and wider impact. So we're growing the B-Corp movement alongside the new economy in Spokane. One talking point I'd like to share, in Spokane, we have a lot of civic pride, and our community is removed from other major urban centers. We're in the inland Northwest, so we're off the coast, off the beaten path a little bit. And so we have a strong sense of our own identity and our own cultural composition here in the inland Northwest. And so we like to be a little competitive about other cities in the Northwest. And Portland has about 100 B corporations that are certified, whereas Spokane only has 3 or 4 now, which is 3 or 4 more than we had a few years ago. So we want to 10x the number of certified B corporations in our business ecosystem, and most businesses in Spokane just haven't heard about B corporations yet. Once they learn about that system of accountability and evaluation and communicating to customers, And as we educate more customers about what this certification means, we're really kind of building a generative feed forward cycle that incentivizes more businesses to go through that process. So that's very much in the heart of some of the kind of work that we're doing here with SIMBA.
So are your members primarily people in the Spokane area?
So for business eligibility, we encourage any business in the region, the Inland Northwest, to join our ranks. So we are very interested in urban-rural partnerships. So how do we connect urban consumers in the city of Spokane and surrounding areas to rural makers and producers? We have some interesting partners in that work that are producer cooperatives. And we have a pretty robust buy local campaign called Live Local Inland Northwest, which was able to pivot during the pandemic to help small businesses that didn't have a website presence get online, be discovered by consumers who are looking to support small businesses through the crisis, which is ongoing for businesses, I'll tell you that much. It's not over yet. And we were able to drive a lot of traffic and a lot of business towards these small micro enterprises that otherwise just would have gotten lost in the shuffle of everything that people were dealing with through the peak of the pandemic.
And are you helping them with social media?
Yes, when and where that is a gap that's needed help with, we are able to provide it. Yeah, so our membership benefits for SIMBA members are in 5 category areas. So marketing, customer development, networking, technical assistance and support, and advocacy support and services and guidance are the 5 areas of benefits that we offer our members.
That sounds great. I wish we had something like that. How is founding an organization different than founding a business?
Well, first of all is who your boss is. So developing a trusted board of directors who are ultimately responsible for the fiduciary existence of the entity and following laws and incorporation procedures is a process. It's a very iterative one. And so it's a build the plane as you're flying it in most cases. I started SIMBA on a grassroots basis. So we've steadily grown over the last 4 years, but different nonprofits come into being in different ways. So if you're part of a very large nonprofit organization, perhaps that's taking a program and spinning that off into a separate entity, you would start off with very different resources than a grassroots social benefit startup. And so, gosh, I've started a business with my husband called Our Natural Homes. It's a co-living rental company here in Spokane and Olympia. And that was a very small business as well, but in a completely different industry. So I think one thing for people who are thinking about striking out on their own in the nonprofit space as opposed to the for-profit space, which I think is a false dichotomy that we need to tear down, and that's part of SIMBA's mission as well, is to understand that what worked for one person with one product or service could be completely different for you. There's a staggering amount of diversity among nonprofit organizations, just as there is among businesses. And with B-Corps and social purpose corporations, we're starting to blur the lines between those silos a bit more and recognize that all organizations have an economic and social impact, not just nonprofits.
Now, you have experience in a lot of areas, program development and fundraising, marketing, government relations, leadership development. How do you really use these knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have acquired in your extremely active life that you have?
I use those different skills on a daily basis as a sole person organization. Ideally, what we're offering right now, I'd have a team of 3 or 4 or 5 staff people who specialize in those areas. And so in some of those areas, I don't do them to their utmost perfection, but I know enough to know how to evaluate someone else's work in that field. And so we were able to scale up and deliver a large business support campaign through the pandemic because I knew enough people who did specialize in these other areas of work to bring them on board, define their role, write up a contract, get them deployed, and get people meeting on a regular basis to compare notes for what needed to happen next as we were delivering services to our business community.
You were a community organizer for a statewide advocacy group fighting for racial and economic justice. Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, working at Washington Can was essentially my version of graduate school. The school of hard knocks, because there are some programs that are now teaching community organizing as a formal professional discipline, but historically and traditionally, our profession has not been professionalized. That's something we've struggled with because so much of the work we do is outside of the establishment. And so we don't get the credibility for the skill that it takes to do our work well. My great grandfather, who is a relative of yours, was an unpaid, most of the time, community organizer. And so I just feel a great degree of privilege to actually be able to earn a steady wage for the work I do in this realm, because for many social justice workers, that is not the case. And there's a lot of equity issues in who has access to creating paid positions and who does not. And the work takes a toll. It's very emotionally difficult work. And I was fortunate to discover this as an actual profession through my work in the Washington State Legislature in the wake of the Great Recession. So I had the dubious privilege of witnessing 30% wide budgetary cuts across our state, across all areas of programming in state government. And I'd seen those cuts on the nonprofit social benefit side, working for a community development agency in Spokane. I'd come back from college and was excited about reinvesting in my hometown and kind of reversing the brain drain that our community had struggled with, that had taken graduates like myself away from Spokane and shunted us off to bigger cities with more high-paid white-collar job opportunities. And I wanted to go in the opposite direction and see what could be done to make Spokane a more vibrant magnet urban center, in the beautiful region that we call home here. And so I had been working on all these initiatives, and it seemed like change was tangible and was within our reach. And then the economy crashed, and our dreams and hopes for Spokane's potential came crashing down on the rocks of reality, as my father likes to say. And it just didn't make sense that when our community needed resources the most, the state government was least able to provide them. Because in Washington, we have the most regressive tax code in the entire country, where the rich pay the least as a percentage of their income and lower income families and folks pay the most as a percentage of their income, which of course is unfair. A flat rate would be more fair than what we have now. And I would submit that a progressive tax would be more equitable and would help our state live out our values better. So anyhow, the funds weren't there, and I was getting my hours cut, and I was recruited to work in Olympia for the Senate Majority Leader at the time. And I got to see how the sausage was made, and I got to understand why the money wasn't getting to where it needed to go at the time that it was needed and the amounts that were needed. And I saw the political logjam take place. And even though Democrats had such a narrow majority in the House and the state Senate at that time, the majority wasn't strong enough to really drive a decisive political agenda. And so I saw conservative Democrats throwing their weight around as swing votes, trying to leverage that for committee appointments, a lot of maneuvering. And, I think there was more good people in state government than there were self-interested people in state government. So that's the good news. I think it lower levels of government, there really are people who are still in politics for the right reasons. I think people need to hear that message. It's not what we see on the news. It's, we always get the worst case scenarios that are meant to get us agitated and have a reaction to the article, gets, sucked into the drama there. But basically, I saw good people have their hands tied in that political environment. And the one thing that made the biggest difference in that 6-month period of just, being on the phones and being my senator's eyes and ears and listening to correspondence from constituents who were suffering. I remember, I'll never forget this phone call from a disabled vet who lived in a trailer up in North Spokane. He said, "What do I pay for, my medications or my electricity? I can't pay for both. What do I do?" And the state had just cut the cash assistance program that was meant to assist people in his position. And it was just, heart-wrenching and radicalizing, honestly, to listen to thousands of people share their stories and not have any recourse, not be able to have even a channel of advocacy within Spokane to change the system that was punishing them materially in their daily lives. And so it was a grassroots coalition of community and labor groups that put together a very powerful week of action that culminated in the community organizations occupying the state capitol. And this is before Occupy Wall Street and that whole movement ensued later on. But it was the first time that tactic had been used as part of a sustained and strategic campaign. And it sent shockwaves throughout the legislature. And it created the political momentum for the Democrats to do what they needed to do the whole time, which was step forward and pass tax loophole closure bills to bring back revenue from corporations who, cut a special deal through their lobbyists and put that money back into the public trust in places where it was really needed in the wake of the financial crisis. And that was so inspiring to me. And I thought, gosh, if that's what it takes to create change, if that's what it takes to be the tiebreaker to help these lawmakers do what's needed by the public, I want to be a part of that. I want to learn those skills. I want to bring that form of citizen and community power back to my city. And that's what I was able to do over the course of 3 years. I had the privilege of learning from some well-respected movement leaders. I was part of a cohort of other young people who they all were people of color. And I learned a lot seeing the struggle through their eyes and working alongside them in many different struggles and campaigns over the course of 3 years. And it changed who I am and gave me tools for kind of becoming my own form of leader in my community, where these skills and these perspectives of grassroots empowerment are really needed quite sincerely and seriously now and into the future. So I've been able to train other people and help guide young people get involved in politics and nonprofit advocacy work, and in the entrepreneurial space and in the cultural landscape in Spokane. So I've created the fulfilling life that I wanted to here in Spokane. It's very busy and not a dull moment goes by. It's always something to make a difference with.
Well, I think people will see that when we keep talking about the other things that you're working on. One of them is building Haystack Heights Cohousing. So tell us what cohousing is and how you decided to take on that challenge.
So this is a great transition, actually, because I like to explain my interest in cohousing and pursuit of the cohousing development, which my husband and I, Jim Dawson, have been working on for the last 5 years, was actually inspired by community organizing. My training program I think it was the summer of 2011 or 2012, when I was first starting as a community organizer, had me knocking on doors in an exurb of Seattle called Linwood, and knocked on 300 plus 400 doors that summer, and actually probably way more than that. But I just saw how people in single family homes were really isolated from each other socially. Very few people knew their neighbors. And not only did they not know their neighbors, because they weren't personally familiar with their neighbors, their imaginations ran wild, and they had all kinds of stories about how terrible people and dangerous people their neighbors were. And then I actually went and talked to that, beware of the neighbor individual, and found them to be quite delightful and quite concerned. And of course, each one interaction versus seeing them over a period of time, but there was definitely a disconnect between people's perception of their neighborhood and the reality in their neighborhood. I also encountered a lot of people who are struggling. I remember one woman told me, she said, I see what you're doing. I appreciate your call to action, and I just can't because I'm dying of brain cancer. Mm-hmm. And, that just hit me. And I could tell she was so alone, dying of brain cancer in her house by herself. It was just, it was inhumane, really. A lot of the, parents struggling with childcare, people working 3 jobs. The American dream, the neighborhood looked like, a nice little American suburb, but behind that front door, people were in a lot of pain and experiencing a lot of struggle. And a lot of that was due to their isolation and their lack of community through which to affect, social and structural change that would have improved their lives. And so in order to do community organizing, you have to have a community to organize. And I have just seen firsthand how our single family home style of lifestyle, our material wealth has really separated us socially. And when we're not a community, we have a hard time organizing to affect change that benefits whole communities. So co-housing for us was a way to live out our values, to surround ourselves by like-minded, caring, active people who, want to go in on a community garden together, who, want to trade cooking meals, who, at different phases of life would like to help with childcare or start a family. I hope to start a family in co-housing. So co-housing is an expression of our practice as community organizers. My husband's a community organizer as well, and he's helped to be a source of support for me. It's difficult work. A lot of people try it and burn out, but because I had Jim, he kept me level-headed and kept me getting back into the ring over the years. And so now, found my center of sustainability in the movement work. But I should probably explain what co-housing is now that I've explained the why of why we're doing this. So co-housing is essentially a custom pocket neighborhood where residents come together to design this neighborhood that uses the built environment to facilitate social connection and collaboration among the members of the community. And a lot of that collaboration is optional. So people ask, do you have to do a certain number of hours, of work every month, or, you have to serve on all these committees? We do ask everyone participate in at least one committee. Most people participate in many more. And there is a minimum number of service hours per year, but not per month or per week or per day or anything like that. And co-housing is different from other intentional communities in that there's no shared enterprise or shared income. So everyone has their own private professions and their own privately owned homes that they can actually sell should they move away from the community for whatever reason. But we do have a large owned in common clubhouse, if you will, known as a common house. Ours is 3,200 square feet. It's about 90% finished. I'm sitting here on a 3-acre site, and the common house is in the middle of this site, and I'm on this edge. And I can't wait for us to get our certificate of occupancy and to be able to start hosting common meals. So our community is a very food-oriented and gardening-oriented bunch of folks. Not everybody's into those things, but a lot of us are. Many master gardeners, chefs, people who've catered, master composters. And so there's a whole, farm to table cycle that we're excited to explore together in an urban context on our land here in the Perry District in the East Central neighborhood of Spokane. So we're about 7 minutes from downtown, so we can walk and bike. I plan to sell my car when I move into co-housing, go down to a 1-car family. We'll park our car on the street. We will not have an on-site garage or anything of that nature. So we're really trying to live light on the land. But anyhow, the Common House has guest bedrooms that can be checked out on a calendar basis, 2 full bathrooms, a living room for knitting circles, watch parties, book clubs, smaller group gatherings. Then the main dining hall and event center space is open to a gourmet kitchen, which we have designed to accommodate 3 chefs. We also have a food processing pantry off of the kitchen. And so that's where we plan to do things like salting and pickling and drying herbs and making yogurt and all these kinds of things, preserving foods. We have a canning sink that'll live out on the back porch below our orchard in the garden. So we have a lot of fun visions for sustainable food adventures. But we also have a 3-sided fireplace and soapstone oven. So it'll be a wood-fired fireplace, and then we'll be able to bake bread from the heat in the wood-fired oven below it. So if the electricity ever goes out, we have that as a way to be resilient in the face of, the grid being down. We do have solar on the site. We have a 2-story shop, woodworking and industrial arts and bike repair kind of area. The second floor is a music rehearsal room and a teen hangout space. And the teens get to program and design and manage their own space there. And it's separate from the Common House. So it's a little further afield, whereas in the Common House, we have a kids room, which is great for sleepovers and supervised craft activities and, daycare and like story time, after dinner. So there's a lot to the site, and I'm happy to answer any questions that brought up for you. But each of us have bought into the community as a resident owner. It's the fruition of 5 years worth of work. I'll be moved in next month.
That's exciting. You also co-founded Train Spokane. What is that?
Yes. So way back in the day in 2008, when I had come home to Spokane after college, I just had moved from the north side, which is a suburb, to downtown. My mother's house that she renovated in Peaceful Valley, which is a historic neighborhood in our city on the river, right next to the urban core, was 4 houses down from where my great-grandfather lived during the Great Depression, when he first landed in Spokane from Montana. And so it's a very historic neighborhood. And there's just a lot of creative people living there. And I got sucked into the community and just saw Spokane for this, textured, diverse, urban American place. And it was exciting. And, Spokane didn't have the wave of wealth that swept over coastal cities and destroyed a lot of historic buildings. And so in Spokane, you kind of sense like it's like a city out of time. We still have a lot of our brick infrastructure downtown, and it's a compelling environment for creative people to collaborate. And it used to be more affordable to live here. Spokane has been discovered, and is part of the national and international housing crisis that many cities are facing. But I just, where were the art galleries? Where were the theater troupes and the, live performance? And I had many creative friends that also were feeling like there was, more was possible. And so I helped bring them together, and we wanted to create a platform for featuring the creative visions and work of our generation. And so Terrain was born. It was a multimedia arts festival event to begin with, and some very talented friends of mine continued that legacy and built upon it. And since they've grown it into a full-time gallery space. They've created a maker's retail storefront that's in the heart of our mall, which is locally owned. The family who owns the mall still lives in our city. They're kind of the oligarchs of Spokane, but at least they're still locally owned, which is unique. They also own the paper and the TV station, which is unique to have those institutions be locally owned in a city of our size. So Spokane can use some of its challenges as actually strengths in doing this new economy work, because of our position in the economy and what infrastructure has been able to persevere here that has not in other more superheated markets. So yeah.
Well, I'm also dying to know what the Spokane Shrinking Violet Society is.
Yes, so that is informal social cooperative, not exclusively for women, but focusing primarily on women. So we do have friends who are non-binary in their gender identity, some friends who are women but were not assigned female at birth. And so there's just, and some men who like to join us for conversation or meals. It's been on hold somewhat through the pandemic, because most people have been attending to their families and their career pivots and other things of that nature. But for 10 years, we had monthly social brunches, and every month, second Saturdays, a different local artist would do the invitation, and different people would contribute to our newsletter and we had a website and a social following, and there's no membership dues, there's no board of directors, there's no formal incorporation. It's kind of an anarchistic. If you're looking to plug into the creative life in Spokane, show up to a Violets event, meet people, get some phone numbers. Many people have met their best friends or even partners through the Shrinking Violet Society. People have shared skills over the years. We've done sewing workshops, make your own deodorant. We do clothing swaps pretty regularly. Through the pandemic, we had some virtual clothing swaps where people would deliver their items to the people who wanted those things, to have a contactless clothing exchange. So that's just been a way to build community across neighborhoods among people with some, similar experiences and interests and a sense of open-mindedness about, not having a narrow social circle, but wanting to really kind of have a bigger understanding of what's happening in the region.
You must come up with ideas in your sleep with all these things that you're doing. And in addition, you serve on the board of Spokane's University District. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. So share with us, I guess, 3 of the most important lessons learned from the myriad of involvement in so many different areas, and maybe put one of those into how you manage your time during all this.
That's a great prompt. I would say, I'm always learning. So my biggest lessons are evolving from year to year. I would say a career lesson is I tend to be an outcomes oriented person, and I often need to slow down and remember, build the relationship first, and really think along a longer time horizon. Fortunately, I've committed to this geographic place and know that I will be here to reap the rewards of those long-term relationships. But sometimes my enthusiasm and my patience puts me in a position of kind of pushing people too far too fast. So that's something I need to really watch as a leader and a organizer and mentor to friends and colleagues in my organizations. So yeah, remember having that right balance between relationship and outcome is one lesson. I think my more recent, fresher lesson, I'm still in the process of learning, has to do with self-knowledge. Through the pandemic, some, like for many people who are doing a lot more introspection these days, I had some personal realizations that I was in denial about the fact that I'm a neurodiverse person. I was diagnosed with ADHD in college, and I just kind of put that aside because I had other qualities that allowed me to mask the challenges that people with ADHD live with every day. And I just thought, oh, well, if it doesn't look like it's affecting me, then I can just pretend it doesn't apply to me. And that wasn't fair to me. I actually do, neurologically have those difficulties. Measuring time is one of them. I'm time blind, actually. There's a term for it. And I struggle with being late to appointments and have had to create all kinds of compensatory strategies. And so I've learned that while I'm very capable in many regards, I'm known as something called twice exceptional. So my strengths mask some of my struggles, and my struggles are contextual. And so in one situation, it could be a real problem, and in another situation, it could be a real strength. And that further confuses people as to what my capabilities are. And so a lot of times I struggle to get people to take me seriously. Like, I remember one executive was like, well, you're a community organizer. What are you doing building a neighborhood? And I had to kind of set them straight and be like, well, all these reasons, and why wouldn't I be building a neighborhood? But the 2E kind of confuses people as to where you're coming from and what's driving you. And so I've had to really interrogate that as a professional and as a leader to get out of my own way, to get to the next level of performance and the next level of responsibility, and being able to hire a team to do this work with me, which is my real growth step professionally at this time. And so, in terms of time management, I think the lesson would be to manage your energy, not your time. Yeah. Time is tricky, it's a subjective construct in the bigger scheme of things. And if you are really being honest with yourself and what's happening internally, not just what people see externally, you can have this superpower of compressing time and kind of accelerating what you bring in terms of innovation or insight to your work as a leader, as a visionary. And so things that might take other people years to arrive at, you could actually connect to and deliver in a matter of minutes or hours or weeks. And so managing energy instead of trying to manage your time. And there's a lot of great strategies about time blocking. And I'm a person who has 4 different color-coded calendars. And if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist, because my ADHD brain can't automatically track and record tasks in that way, because I have challenges, profound challenges with executive functioning, actually. But I also have great strengths in circular forms of reasoning, which allow me to leap to conclusions, which I can intuit the answers, and then I start back from the beginning and can tell the story of how I got there. And sometimes there's an uncanny habit of being right. The instinct to build community organizing skills way back then, so I could do what I'm doing now. The instinct of building a supportive neighborhood that supports the lifestyle for the kind of advocacy work I do day in and day out, that I'm just compelled and driven to do, whether I want to do it or not. Every day, that's a part of, my heart shining out into the world. And I need a supportive community to allow me to fulfill that role. And so I think co-housing will serve me for the rest of my entire life. It will serve my children that I don't even have yet, So it's an example of this kind of cyclical approach to planning and life management, and being able to create that ecosystem where a work-life balance is possible. I was doing my stretches this morning, and the thought hit me: I don't want to have a balancing act. I want to have a balancing performance in my life. And I've been acting out balance for a very long time, and I am ready to begin to perform balance in my life.
So walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about you're focusing on energy, do you actually practice that during the day? Like, for instance, your energy cycle, where some people are really morning people and they have a ton of energy in the morning, and then it kind of wanes and dips in various times. Do you do any of that?
I'm a night owl. So mornings, as an ADHD person, my dopamine doesn't fire up at the beginning of the day like a normal person. And so I have to go through a lot of steps and rituals to physically and mentally wake myself up. But I've been experimenting with those different routines, and I've figured out how to fit into the rest of the world's 9-to-5 schedule. And so that's its own challenge. But the more attuned you become to yourself, the more you can recognize early warning signs. So I have to schedule all of my meals on my calendar, otherwise I will forget to eat. I can just get so tunnel vision and hyper-focused on whatever it is I'm doing, whoever it is I'm trying to convince, or whatever partnership or the grant that I'm writing, or, the phone call, that time doesn't exist. And so meals on my calendar help bring me back into the present moment. I get out into my garden multiple times a day to compost, water something. So physical activity breaks. I've learned, I was really dormant during the pandemic in a way that curtailed performance, and have more recently finally discovered a form of physical activity and exercise that works for me. Because it stimulates my brain as well as my body. So Jim and I signed up for Krav Maga classes. So we're doing martial arts, and it's this Israeli methodology of self-defense. And it matches the level of intensity of my internal brain environment, and actually helps to complete the stress cycle. Because we are in the knowledge economy, working on our computers. Those of us who are office workers have a lot of psychic stress, deadlines, managing tasks. For me as an ADHD person, all of that is very stressful. But we don't have any physical threats to match the level of psychic load that we're managing on a day-to-day basis, and worrying about the state of the world, and, global food supply chains, and Delta variants, and, toxic politics, and all the things. So doing something really aggressive and really, dukes up, like literally punching and kicking, is the most relaxing thing I have ever done to help achieve a better work-life balance. So it kind of helps embody the intensity I feel for the work that I perform on an ongoing basis.
That's amazing. Here's your last question. What is the biggest tip you have for people your age today?
Wow. Protect your tender heart is really what comes up for me. Millennials were raised by boomers who had a program that worked for them in the world, of getting that college degree and buying the house. And, I think many of them sought to have security in their careers and to be able to provide for families. And my generation, many of us are still not homeowners. We came out into the workforce with very specialized degrees designed for white collar positions that actually didn't necessarily exist in our communities. I got this very technical degree, and I had to walk away from it to actually live out my values in my hometown near my family. Modern capitalism asks us to be labor ready and just to go wherever the job is. Never mind where your family is, never mind, your history of lived experience and the culture you came from to that date. We're supposed to just hop on a plane and fly out to wherever we get that paycheck that can help us afford astronomical rents, So a lot of millennials have had a real disconnect between what the world we were raised up for and the world that we're actually living in. And we have our parents did provide a stable material reality for many of us, not everyone. There's, poverty is a chronic problem in this country that should not be allowed to continue to exist. And it is within our power to exterminate, quite honestly, but we choose not to do that collectively yet. And anyhow, I think that dynamic is exacerbated in Gen Z. So I mean, the question was for people my age. And I think I'm starting to see commercials come out targeted to Gen Z. And it's just interesting what corporate America's version of that experience is telling us that consciousness looks like. And I think it's different than what Nike or some of these other major multinational corporations are suggesting is what Gen Z cares about and thinks, and how they think and how they should act. And so I think that's my advice to my generation is, let's protect our tender hearts. Our instincts are alive and seek to serve the greater good, not just us as individuals. And as humanity confronting the climate crisis, we are going to have to grow into a greater degree of altruism and collaboration and, love for our fellow humankind, not just in our country, like from a nationalist, jingoistic perspective, but from an international and humanistic perspective. And so I think that's, our generation hasn't been given a lot of the career opportunities to enforce those values in workplaces. There's still a lot of boomers and Gen Xers who maybe are really cynical, kind of holding on and thinking they need to enforce things as they've always been. And we're just confronting tectonic changes on many levels of society simultaneously. And I try to bring my peers together to say, how can we lead differently? How can we collaborate differently? How can we decenter our egos and our racial privilege in the work that we do to have more of an impact and to build more collective power and more resilience in the face of this uncertain future?
Well, all I can say is good for you. You're doing good, just like we said in the very beginning. And I really applaud and appreciate how far you are trying to take this for not just yourself, but for the world. And I know you will get there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nan. It was a pleasure to get to share with you. And I don't get to put all the different pieces of my life together in one conversation that often. Usually I'm having a conversation on just one topic with one person at a time. So it's kind of fun to step back and see how the pieces fit together. And when I listen to myself talk, I'm just like, oh, she's got something to say, And so it's a weird thing to have a lot to say, but to not feel like what you have to say is of real value, and it's that some of that cognitive dissonance and conditioning as a woman in the world, and other, forms of identity that I embody. But I appreciate your platforming of leaders and different, exceptional people to share what they've learned. It's enriching, and I thank you for what you do.
Well, you do have a lot to say, and what you say is very worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you, Nan.